Happy birthday, you owe us $43,800 for the crime of being born, my father said, handing me an itemized invoice. He logged every can of formula, took my paychecks, and locked me in the basement until I learned gratitude. I worked 28 hours, a week for a debt he invented. He didn't know I was documenting him too. My name is Ren. I grew up in a 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood where the lawns were always trimmed and nobody asked too many questions. My father was an accountant. My mother managed the household budget with the same precision he applied to client portfolios. From the outside, we looked like a family that had everything organized. And we did. That was the problem. I don't have a single memory of a time before the ledger. By the time I was old enough to understand what it was, it had already been running for years. The binder was gray, a 4 size, with color-coded tabs along the right edge. My father kept it on the second shelf of his home office, between a tax reference manual and a 3-ring binder labeled Household Operations. It was never hidden. That was intentional. When I was 5 years old, he sat me down at the kitchen table and explained how things worked in our house. He spoke the way he always spoke, measured, without inflection, the way you'd explain a process to a new employee. Raising a child costs money, he said. Money is not a gift. It is earned, or it is owed. He opened the binder and showed me the running total. I was 5. I didn't understand most of the words, but I understood the number because he pointed at it and waited for me to look at it directly before he continued. That was the first time I heard the phrase proper gratitude. He said it was the foundation of a functioning family. Proper gratitude meant understanding what things cost. It meant not wasting. It meant behaving in a way that reflected well on the people who had invested in you. My mother nodded from the doorway. She didn't add anything. She never needed to. The system had rules. Good grades issued a credit against the balance. Completed chores earned credits, 2 small ones, a few dollars at a time, logged in the binder every Sunday. But infractions ran the other direction. A wasted meal was a waste fee. A raised voice was a disloyalty charge. A bad test score added a line item my father called a performance deficit. He had a word for everything. That was part of how it worked. If something had a name, it felt official. And if it felt official, it felt like it had always been this way. For most of my childhood, punishment meant a skipped meal or being confined to my room. I learned quickly to calculate before I asked for anything. Is this worth the charge? Can I afford to need this right now? By the time I was 10, I was doing the math automatically, the way other kids do multiplication without thinking about it, just as a reflex that had always been there. The basement started when I was 12. I had a fever that week, I remember that clearly, because my mother had checked my temperature that morning and written it in the health log. That evening, I couldn't finish my dinner. A bowl of soup, mostly broth. My father waited until I set the spoon down. Then he picked up his pen and opened the binder. He wrote the date, the item, the cost, $2.40. Then he wrote 2 words in the notes column, character deficiency. He told me I needed a correction space. Somewhere I could think about the difference between what I had been given and what I had chosen to appreciate. He walked me downstairs. 1 wooden chair. 1 bulb. The door locked from the outside. By the time I was 12, I had learned to calculate the cost of everything I ate before I asked for it. My 17th birthday fell on a Tuesday in October. My mother made dinner: roast chicken, rice, green beans. She set the table with the good placemats, the ones she only used when she wanted something to feel like an occasion. My father came to the table in his work clothes, which he sometimes did when he had something to present. He waited until we had started eating. Then he set the binder on the table next to his plate. "You're 17 today," he said. "That means we move into the next phase." He opened to a tab section I had never seen before. The header on the page read Repayment Schedule V3. He walked me through it the way he would walk a client through a financial plan, calmly, with occasional pauses to make sure I was following. The total as of that morning was $43,800. Beginning now, I was old enough to contribute meaningfully toward that balance. I would get a job. My paychecks would be deposited into a joint account he would open in both our names, with himself as the primary account holder. My personal allowance would be $15 per week. He said this was a milestone. He said most parents never gave their children the opportunity to understand the real value of what they had been given. He said I should feel grateful. I looked at the roast chicken on my plate. I looked at the binder. I said nothing. Then he turned to the last section. At the bottom of the final page, there was a paragraph he read aloud slowly, making sure I caught every word. It said that if I chose to terminate the arrangement early, or if I involved any outside parties in a family financial matter, a penalty of $10,000 would be added to the outstanding balance, recoverable through wage garnishment if necessary. He had signed and dated it. October 14th. He closed the binder and picked up his fork. "Happy birthday, Ren," he said. "You're finally old enough to start paying us back." My mother smiled and asked if I wanted more rice. I said no thank you. I calculated the cost of the portion already on my plate, and I ate what I had taken because leaving food was a waste fee, and I could not afford a waste fee tonight. Not tonight, of all nights. There was a reference on that last page I hadn't fully registered yet. A note in small print at the bottom that said, "See also, USB." I didn't ask what it meant. I filed it away the way I filed away everything in that house. Quietly, carefully, in case it mattered later. It mattered later. I applied to the grocery store on purpose. It was 3 blocks from school, close enough to walk, and the break room had a bowl of bruised fruit that the shift supervisor left out every afternoon, the pieces too damaged to sell, set aside for staff. Nobody tracked it. Nobody logged it. I ate whatever was in that bowl on every break I took, standing by the sink, quickly, before anyone came in to ask questions. My first paycheck was $280. My father drove me to the bank on a Saturday morning. He had already researched the account type. He spoke to the teller, signed the paperwork, and handed me back $15 in cash when we got to the parking lot. I stood there and counted it. 3 fives. The bus pass for the week was $4.50. That left $10.50 for everything else until the following Saturday. He didn't say anything while I counted. He just waited, keys in hand, the way you wait for someone to finish reading a notice you've already explained. I worked 28 hours a week after school and on weekends. I stocked shelves, ran registers, helped close on Friday nights. Every 2 weeks, a paycheck went into that account. Every 2 weeks, $15 came back out. In 8 months, I would earn close to $9,000. I would receive $520 of it. The rest was his. For the ledger. For the cost of my existence. I didn't tell anyone at work about the account. I smiled when customers needed help, and I kept the bruised fruit to myself, and I didn't think too far ahead, because thinking too far ahead meant running the numbers, and running the numbers meant sitting with what they added up to. The weigh-ins started about a month after the job did. My mother announced them on a Sunday morning as a health initiative. She had printed a log sheet date, measurement, notes, and clipped it to the refrigerator with a green magnet. My father brought the camera from the basement shelf. She said it was for our records. He said it was in case anything ever needed to be documented. He used the word documented the way other fathers use the word safe. The photos were taken in the basement. I stood against the far wall, arms at my sides, eyes forward. My father stood at the camera. My mother stood by the door with her clipboard. He would say okay when he was done, and I would be allowed to go back upstairs. The folder on the family computer was titled Nutrition Documentation. I saw it once by accident when I was using the computer for homework. A folder sitting right there on the desktop, organized by date. I closed the tab and didn't open it again. A few weeks later, my gym teacher mentioned my weight to the school nurse. She was careful about it, kept her voice low, but I was standing close enough to hear. The nurse sent a note home. My mother called the school the following morning. I wasn't in the room, but she told me about it that evening. She said she had explained to them that I had a self-managed eating situation the family was handling privately. She said it with the same tone she used for everything: composed, reasonable, slightly inconvenienced. "We don't need the school involved in family matters," she said. The nurse made a note. No one followed up. I spent 40 hours a week surrounded by food I could not eat without calculating the cost. I found the USB drive on a Saturday in March, about 5 months into the job. I was doing laundry, my father's, because laundry was a household chore with a credit value, and I needed the credits. It fell out of the inside pocket of his work jacket when I lifted it off the hook by the door. Small, black, the kind of generic drive you buy in a pack of 5. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I put it in my pocket and went to the family computer. My parents were both out. I had about 2 hours. The drive had 3 folders. The first was labeled Ledger Archive, 2007-2024. The second was Nutrition Documentation. The third was Repayment Schedule V3. I opened the Ledger Archive first. 17 Excel files. One for each year of my life. I clicked on the oldest one and scrolled to the top. The first entry was dated 3 weeks after I was born. The column headers read, Date, Item, Unit Cost, Running Total. That first line said, Formula, Infamil, 2 cans. The running total in the far right column read $36.40. I sat very still for a while. I had known about the ledger my entire life. I had seen the binder, heard the totals read aloud, understood in some abstract way that my existence had been monetized from the beginning. But seeing it in a spreadsheet row after row after row, 17 years of it, starting before I could hold my own head up, made it different. It made it a document, something that existed outside of his voice and his binder and the slot at the bottom of the door. I opened the repayment schedule next. It was a Word document, 12 pages, formatted like something a financial advisor would hand a client. It projected my income based on assumed post-graduation hours, subtracted a weekly personal allowance of $50 more than 3 times what I was currently receiving, and applied the remainder to the debt. According to page 3, the balance would reach 0 in 2031. I would be 24 years old. There was a section after that. Page 9. It was titled Maintenance Phase. It was 3 paragraphs long, and it described, in careful neutral language, a continued financial arrangement between myself and my parents following debt clearance. The terms were vague in a way that felt deliberate. Page 7 had the paragraph I already knew about: the penalty clause, the $10,000, the wage garnishment language. But seeing it in the full document, surrounded by 12 pages of projections and schedules and headers, made the birthday dinner feel very far away. He had not written that clause the night of my birthday. He had written it long before. This was version 3. I went back to the nutrition documentation folder. I didn't open the files. I just looked at the count in the bottom bar of the window. 212. I took out my school Chromebook from my bag. I propped it open next to the desktop and photographed every page of the repayment schedule, one by one. Then I opened a new folder on the Chromebook's local drive. I called it History Project. I transferred what I could. I put the USB back in my father's jacket pocket before I moved the laundry to the dryer. My entire life was in a folder called Ledger Archive. It had started before I could hold my own head up. I needed to think about what that meant. And I needed to think about it carefully, because page 7 had been very specific about what happened if I involved outside parties. But there were 212 photographs in that folder, and I was getting smaller in every single one of them. I spent 3 nights thinking it through. The penalty clause said $10,000 if I involved outside parties. That was the word he used, involved. I turned that word over for a long time. Involved could mean a lot of things. It could mean a lawyer. It could mean a relative. It could mean saying the wrong thing to the wrong person at school. But I kept coming back to one fact. He had taken photographs, 212 of them, organized by date, sitting in a folder on the family desktop. He had built that folder himself. Whatever those photographs showed, he had chosen to keep them. He believed they protected him. I didn't know yet whether he was right. But I knew that someone else needed to see what was in that binder before I did anything else. On Thursday morning, I printed 1 page from the repayment schedule. Page 7, the penalty clause, the wage garnishment language, my father's signature, the date. I folded it once and tucked it halfway under a notebook in my backpack, visible but not obvious. Then I went to school. Miss Hargrove was my school counselor. I had been meeting with her every other week for about 6 months, ever since a teacher had flagged something to the front office and the front office had set up the check-ins. I had said very little in those meetings. I answered her questions with short answers, and I kept my hands in my lap, and I waited for the 20 minutes to be over. She was patient. She never pushed. That Thursday, I set my backpack on her desk when I came in. I didn't say anything. I sat down and waited. She noticed the page after about 30 seconds. She looked at me before she touched it. I nodded. She read it slowly. When she finished, she set it down flat on the desk, smoothed it once with her hand, and looked at me. "How long has this been going on?" she said. "Since before I could walk," I said. She asked if I had more. I opened the Chromebook and turned the screen toward her without handing it over. She leaned forward. I watched her eyes move across the folder structure, the 17 Excel files, the Word document, the subfolder I hadn't opened for her. She was quiet for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called the front desk. She asked them to move her next 2 appointments. She didn't cry. She didn't tell me everything was going to be okay. She just got very still in the way that people get still when they are deciding what to do next, and they already know what the answer is. That stillness told me more than anything she could have said. I walked home that afternoon the same way I always did. I didn't tell anyone. I ate dinner. I said the right number of words. I went to bed. The next morning, my mother called the school during second period to check in a habit she had maintained for years, just a friendly call to see how things were going. The front desk confirmed I'd had an extended meeting with Miss Hargrove the day before. That evening, my father was waiting at the door when I got home. He didn't say anything. He looked at me for a moment, then pointed toward the basement stairs. I went down. I heard the lock turn. He slid the food through the slot that night. The second day, he slid something else through a scrap of paper torn from the back page of the binder. I picked it up off the floor and read it. Disloyalty surcharge, $500. New total, $44,300. Same neat handwriting. Same blue ink. Same column format, even on a torn scrap, because that was who he was. He could not help documenting. Even his punishments required a paper trail. I folded the scrap and put it in the inside pocket of my hoodie. He had slid that piece of paper under the door like he was paying a bill. Like I was an invoice. I was released on the third day. My father unlocked the door in the morning, the same way he always did. No explanation, no discussion, just the sound of the bolt and the door swinging open. I went upstairs, got ready for school, and left the house at the usual time. On the walk to school, I ran the numbers. Not the ledger numbers. My numbers. I was 17. I had 8 months until I turned 18. In my head, 18 had always meant something, a threshold, a door I could eventually walk through. But the repayment schedule had been very clear about what 18 actually meant inside our house. It meant nothing. The arrangement ran to 24. The penalty clause ran indefinitely. The joint account was in his name. I had no savings, no emergency fund, nowhere to go. I had earned close to $9,000 in 8 months of working, and I had $520 of it. And there were 212 photographs on that computer. I didn't know exactly what he planned to do with them, but the folder existed for a reason. He had labeled it nutrition documentation, and he had dated every file, and he had kept it on the desktop where it was easy to find. That was not an accident. That was infrastructure. He built things that way so they were ready when he needed them. The cost of staying silent was not zero. It was compounding. Every week the paycheck went into that account. Every week the ledger ticked upward with fees I couldn't always anticipate. Every year I stayed, the maintenance phase on page 9 got closer. I did not fully understand what the maintenance phase meant, but I understood that he had written it, and that he had written it in the same document as the penalty clause, and that nothing he had ever written had been written carelessly. I calculated the cost of silence the same way he had taught me to calculate everything else. And for the first time, the number on that side of the ledger was bigger than the number on the other side. I went straight to Miss Hargrove's office when I got to school. She was already at her desk. She looked up when I came in, and I could tell from her expression that she had been waiting, not surprised, just waiting. She turned her computer screen toward me without saying anything first. The email was open. Subject line: CPS intake referral submitted. The timestamp in the top right corner read 8:47 a.m. The morning after our meeting, she had not waited. She said, "I'm a mandated reporter, Ren. I didn't have a choice after what you showed me." She paused. "But you do have a choice right now. You can tell them it was a misunderstanding. You can say you exaggerated. It would slow things down, maybe stop them entirely." I looked at the timestamp. 8:47 a.m. She had filed it before I had even gotten to school the next morning. Before my father had slid the surcharge under the door. I thought about the scrap of paper in my hoodie pocket. I thought about $36.40. I thought about the word proper gratitude, and the word documented, and the 12 pages of the repayment schedule, and the 3 paragraphs of the maintenance phase, and the 212 files I had not opened. I thought about the camera on the shelf, the one he had placed there himself. "I'm not taking it back," I said. Miss Hargrove nodded once. She picked up her phone. I had spent 17 years learning to calculate the cost of everything. That morning, I finally calculated the cost of staying silent. The number was too high. I was done paying it. 2 days later, they came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at school when it happened. I found out the sequence afterward, pieced together from what Miss Hargrove told me and what the CPS investigator documented in her report. But I have gone over it enough times that I can see it clearly. My father answered the door. 2 CPS investigators and 2 uniformed officers. He looked at them for a moment, then stepped back and invited them in. He offered coffee. He was calm, not the calm of someone caught off guard, but the calm of someone who had considered this possibility and prepared for it. He had been preparing for things his entire adult life. That was who he was. He brought the binder to the kitchen table. He sat across from the lead investigator, a woman in her 40s with a spiral notebook, and he walked her through the system the way he had walked me through it at 5 years old. Raising a child costs money. Money is not a gift. Proper gratitude is the foundation of a functioning family. He opened to the color-coded tabs and explained each one. He spoke without defensiveness, without apology. In the measured tone of a man presenting documentation he believed proved his case. The investigator wrote in her notebook and did not react visibly. She asked to see the full house. He walked them through each room. Kitchen, living room, his office, where the binder lived on the second shelf between the tax manual and the household operations folder. Upstairs, the bedrooms, the bathroom, the linen closet. He narrated as he went, calm and cooperative, because he genuinely believed the tour was going well. The basement was last. She descended the stairs and stopped. One wooden chair. One overhead bulb on a pull chain. A door at the base of the stairs with a slot cut into the bottom panel, roughly the width of a dinner plate. And on the far wall, 5 years of marks height scratched into the paint at different levels, and below them, tally marks carved in groups, dated in pencil beside each cluster. 182 of them in total. I had made them with the broken end of a pen, one mark for each day, because I needed something in that room that was mine and that he had not put there. My father began explaining the concept of a correction space. The investigator stopped writing in her notebook. She opened the voice memo app on her phone and set it on the step beside her. The door, she noted, only locked from the outside. Back upstairs, a forensic technician moved through the house with evidence bags. The family desktop came off the desk. The binder came off the shelf. A cardboard box filled with physical records came out of the filing cabinet in the office. My father watched from the kitchen doorway. He did not try to stop them. He still believed the documentation would vindicate him. He had spent 17 years building a record of everything. It did not occur to him, even then, that the record was the problem. The technician found the USB in the computer's side port, still plugged in. My father had put it back himself. She cataloged the drive's contents: 17 Excel workbooks, one Word document, 212 JPEG files with names formatted by date, and one PDF on the desktop labeled REN Debt Summary, updated October 2024. There was a copy of the repayment schedule. There was the penalty clause. There was my father's signature and the date. My mother had said very little through all of it. She stood near the kitchen window, arms folded, watching. When a neighbor from across the street came out onto her porch to see what was happening, my mother looked at her and said, "This is a family matter." The neighbor didn't respond. They walked my father out through the front door in handcuffs. He was wearing the dress slacks and button-down he had put on for the investigators, the same clothes he wore to client meetings. He looked at the street, at the neighbor on her porch, at the other houses with their trimmed lawns. He said, "This is private family business." Nobody answered him. The neighbor who stood on that porch lived 2 houses down from the grocery store where I worked. I had seen her in the aisles enough times to recognize her face, and she had seen me, stocking shelves after school, always in the same rotation, always in the same uniform. She had the kind of face that registered things without saying anything about them. She was not looking away now. She stood on that porch and she watched until the car turned the corner and disappeared. My father spent 17 years building a case. He had documented everything. Every dollar, every infraction, every correction, every photograph dated and filed, every clause signed and witnessed only by himself. He had built it against me. Turns out, he had built it against himself. The case took 11 months. I was placed with a foster family 3 days after the investigators left temporary, arranged through Miss Hargrove's extended family. The Hargroves. They had a house with a yellow front door and a dog that slept in the hallway, and nobody locked anything from the outside. The first evening, the foster mother made pasta. Penne with butter and Parmesan. She set the bowl in front of me at the kitchen table and sat down across from me with her own and started eating without saying anything about portions or costs or what the meal represented. She just ate, like it was a Tuesday. Like bowls of food appeared in front of people and people ate them, and that was the whole transaction. I ate it. I didn't calculate anything. I didn't log anything in my head. I just ate the pasta and it was warm and it cost, I estimated, about $1.40 in ingredients. And I did not say that out loud because I was trying to learn not to say things like that out loud. She put the bowl down and didn't say anything about the cost. I didn't know what to do with that, but I was learning. The prosecution's case was built almost entirely from my father's own files. The repayment schedule was the primary exhibit specifically. Page 7, the penalty clause, the wage garnishment language, his signature, and the date. The assistant district attorney read portions of the document into the record during the preliminary hearing. My father's attorney argued the files demonstrated responsible and thorough parental oversight. The assistant DA then read the titles of the 212 photographs into the record, one by one, in order, by date. My father's case did not improve after that. Both parents entered a plea agreement. Child endangerment, financial exploitation of a minor, unlawful confinement. They received probation and a permanent no-contact order. No prison time, which some people thought was too lenient, and I understood why they thought that. But the plea meant a faster resolution. It meant I didn't have to testify in open court. It meant the no-contact order was legally binding and immediately enforceable. I took the outcome I could get, and I did not spend energy on the outcome I couldn't. The gray binder was entered into evidence and never returned. On my 18th birthday, I signed the emancipation paperwork at the county courthouse. Miss Hargrove came with me. It took about 20 minutes. Nobody made a speech. I opened my own bank account that afternoon, just my name, no co-holder, no primary account designation for anyone else. The teller asked if I needed anything else. I said no. I walked out with the account card in my pocket and I stood on the sidewalk for a minute. My next paycheck would go into that account. All of it. I still catch myself doing the math sometimes. Standing in a grocery store aisle, looking at a price tag, running the calculation before I let myself put something in the cart. It's a reflex. It was installed early and it runs deep, and it doesn't disappear just because the circumstances do. I know that. I'm working on it. But here's what I know for certain. They spent 17 years teaching me to calculate the cost of everything. They built an entire system around that idea: every dollar logged, every infraction charged, every debt compounded, every exit sealed with a clause. They documented all of it. They were meticulous. They were thorough. They were certain the record they kept would protect them. They were right that the record mattered. They just miscalculated who it would protect. Now the only ledger I keep is my own. And for the first time in my life, nobody else gets to calculate the cost.